opening up. Here we go. Woohoo! Ready to roll. All right. Go. Listen to that doorbell. All sorts of, hey, Caroline, Dennis. All right. I love it. So glad to see everyone. We're going to give it a minute and let everybody jump in. Hey, Michelle, it's been a while. Are you still here in Southern California?
Well, I mean,
Yeah, we're actually, I'm sorry, James is on the other.
we make it available.
Okay, we'll talk another time, right? JJ, good to see you again as well. Oh, this is wonderful.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, look at there. Roseanne's even having her coffee. So while we give it a minute and let everybody jump in here, who's got a wonderful drone story? Did they get to get out and share and fly? You want to share? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sorry about that, Desi. Do you hear me now?
I do. I do.
There you go. Yeah, sorry, he was on the other line. Sometimes the earbuds, they ping pong all over to which device you're using anyway. So good to see you all.
Nice. I know. So are you still here in Southern California?
Yes, we are. So we're still participating in the Techstars LA program, but I'd love to talk to you a little bit more offline. We have some exciting news. So
Woo, I love it. Oh, we love exciting news. Hey, hi, Sharon. Awesome. Sharon's been doing quite a bit of traveling as well. There, look at this. Everybody's getting jumped in here. Jim, are you in the field oh, it looks like you get to be in your office today. Nice.
Yeah, for a little while. As soon as we're done here, I head out to 2 construction sites in South Bay.
All right. Jeremiah, good to see you as well. Hope everything's going good. And look, we even have LaQuata here. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I love it. Don't we just love our Tuesday mornings and we get together and share, and we have a fantastic spotlight speaker today. So I know everybody's excited to get to that right away, right? So I just want to give it another minute or so. Remind you that the chat is open. Feel free to put any information in there, share, because we're all about networking, right? So we will also kind of monitor the chat as we go. And I do have a announcement. So I know I've been saying it for a while, but I just want to let you know that today is the last day to nominate somebody for the Women to Watch Global Awards. So I am going to really quickly pop that down into our chat. So, wow, can't believe we're already coming up on the end of the year, right? So we'll give it a minute. I gave you a link. Go ahead and right click on that thing and open it up, because look at all the categories. There's actually 3 different categories now. You have the Women to Watch, Hall of Fame, and top companies. So pretty exciting. And as we know, it will be back at CES in January, right? Oh, I love it. So today's the last day. So you want to make sure you get that in there. And I'm going to make sure I open up the room for a few more people letting in. And then there we go. So I am going to get started with our spotlight speaker. I did make you co-host, so we should be able to share that. I know we're excited to hear from Greg Lang. He's with Pierce County, Washington, and he is a GIS specialist. Oh, so many people love talking GIS and mapping and such. So we're super excited to have him. He has over 22 years with the local government and GIS and assist in management, enterprise level implementation, training, conditional experience, plus over a decade of nonprofit rescue team leadership. I'm super excited to have you. Greg, thank you so much for joining us on the Coffee Connection. And I have you as spotlight. We're going to make you. There you are. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Desi. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cover a topic that, speaking with Desi, she said wasn't covered too often with this group, and that's mapping with drones. So mapping is always ever changing, at least the hardware and the software is. So we'll kind of reframe this and start from today and talk about the current state of mapping and basic workflow with drones. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and just have one kind of introductory slide of our program. Should be able to see it now. So we're Pierce County, and we've had a program for basically 5 years. Started in kind of 2016, 2015 with some early discussions and R&D and trying to figure out how to make things happen. When the Part 107 came about, jumped on that, of course. Started flights in 2017. So we've got 15 pilots from different groups, and that's kind of organically grown from the groups that are just the most interested, maybe have the most pertinent use cases. Those use cases over on the right-hand side, most common ones you can see listed there. We've got 15 that are approved by our county leadership, but those are the use cases that really get the most traction on a day-to-day basis. 22 different aircraft we operate right now in the program, 13 different platforms. And a big part of that is because the pilots have choice. They have preferences, and we have different use cases, and sometimes you want a different tool to do a different job. Over 2,000 flights to date. A lot of successful missions out there. People are very happy with it. We haven't had incidents that have drawn negative attention to the program, so that's great. And then we've got a couple of FAA waivers granted. We had operations over people. We had a night waiver in the past, and beyond visual line of sight waiver in progress right now. Standards and use cases, pilots, hardware, software, workflows, tracking. Those are kind of the components of our program. So with that sort of brief, just going to jump into the mapping workflow kind of slides now. Basic workflow, we're going to cover these pieces. So we're going to talk about hardware. What do you need to fly one of these missions? We're going to talk about flight automation, which is a huge part of mapping, trying to get constant, consistent data. And then it goes to image processing, which is always about the software. And there's lots of choices. I'm going to talk about those different paths. Deliverables are the final piece, and that's being able to provide something that somebody wants or pays you for that is useful to them in their software or their workflow. You can see running down the road there, it's basically a pretty straightforward operation: flight plan, fly the thing, site plan, download it, process, review, deliver, repeat, try to improve. So pretty straightforward, but we're going to break down these yellow components first. So on the hardware side, actually I'm going to decrease the zoom just a little bit. I think it's cutting off the bottom part there. Okay. 12 megapixel or better camera is really the baseline today. So if you're operating a drone with less than 12 megapixels, that's below kind of a basic standard that is operated today for mapping. A lot of cameras are higher than that, sometimes a lot higher. 20 is pretty common, over 40 is becoming more common, but 12 can do a good job. The ability to fly it with software, to consistently have a level surface, overlapping image coverage, that's very important with mapping. We typically use some flight automation software for an app to do that, and that gives us good, consistent, reliable data. Right there in the middle, you can say manual capture is possible, but does require basically overflying the site. So you really have to fly the heck out of it, trying to stay level, trying to get a picture of all portions of the ground, try to get a certain amount of overlap, make sure you don't have any thin areas. It's very difficult to do. And in order to make it work well, you're going to have to spend a lot more time than you should be there to get that piece of work done. So like mowing a lawn with scissors is how I like to call it. It's possible, but you wouldn't want to do it unless you only had to do it like once. And then batteries and charging capacity. Covering lots of acres takes batteries, takes flight time. And so you really have to consider, how big of a site am I going to have to work on? Do I need 2 batteries? Do I need 4 batteries? Do I need 6 batteries? What kind of charging capability do I have out there? Car charger, wall charger, just extra batteries. How many batteries does it take to be kind of self-sufficient if you can charge while you're flying? Generally, it's 4 to 6. So if you got 4 to 6 batteries with a lot of models, you can kind of fly forever, as long as you can keep charging while you're flying. And we do have to do that sometimes. Down at the bottom, you can see kind of the early standard for mapping, at least, was the Phantom 4. So the Phantom 4 Pro was really popular. It was easy to find, easy to buy, easy to use. It was compatible with software. That was a favorite early on, back in 2016, around that time frame. when Part 107 came about. And very quickly, we saw a movement toward the Mavic 2 Pro platform, which got very similar mapping results to the Phantom 4. It was a little more compact, a little more portable. People just like to operate it. And within the mapping platform that we use most commonly, that became the most common platform used kind of internationally within that realm. So it became most common. The Matrice 300 has recently become pretty popular with the P1 camera for mapping. It's a much more expensive platform, does a great job. Not everybody has the space or the budget for it, but it's another growing popular drone for mapping as well. And now just recently, last month, the DJI Mavic 3 Enterprise is becoming sort of the new standard to replace those Phantom 4s. I would say kind of officially, with the mechanical shutter and a lot of the same feature set. There's lots of other drones that map. That's just a sample of some of the most common used within the industry right now. For flight automation, pattern flights, which we're looking for. We want to control the overlap, elevation, speed, and a number of other settings. So we first use kind of a polygon on screen to plan where we want to fly, what we want to cover. And then we want to make sure that we have enough overlap for that area. So you can see that little diagram in the center. It's how you want your images to overlap as you're flying forward. And then as you do the next flight path, how you want the images to overlap going sideways. We often fly with about 60% overlap on the front side and about 70% on the sides. So lots of overlap. And as you fly, some of the smaller lenses, the simpler cameras on drones, like if you try to map with a Mavic 2 Mini, you want to fly even more overlap to compensate for some of the distortion at the edge of that lens. It helps with mapping, and especially if you're doing measuring on those map surfaces later on. We typically fly about 200 feet to 400 plus. And flying lower is generally problematic because we have things sticking out of the ground, trees, stuff like that. Flying above obstacles, we do have to do quite a lot. So 400 plus feet does happen when we're mapping things that are 100 feet off the ground. We'll put in that offset. The speed is usually about 8 to 28 is pretty common. So low level, this time of year, on a day like today, out here in the Pacific Northwest, it's pretty cloudy. The light levels are low. We slow down to as much as, or as slow as 8 or 10 miles an hour to keep those exposures working, keep the blur minimized. But as it gets brighter, we can go faster. And as we go higher, we can go faster. So the lower it is and the dimmer it is, you really got to slow that thing down or the images won't come out very well. How is this done? It's down in the bottom there is a couple of paths. So typically it's a mobile app using a third-party app. Drone Deploy would be an example of that. Pix4 Capture, Drone Link. So those are some of the most common. They go on a smartphone or a tablet, plug into your drone controller, and some of them are free. Some of them you pay for. Lots of them are free actually for this type of thing. On smart controllers these days, it's becoming more common that there's an app kind of built in to fly the drone. And on more expensive commercial or enterprise models, you might use something like DJI Pilot 1 or 2, Autel Explorer, or Skydio 3D Scan to do this sort of mapping auto flight function. And it's just included in the package. So your drone, depending on what you purchase, might come with something to do this sort of flight automation, or it may not. But the flight automation we're talking about is pattern flight for mapping, not waypoint missions or cool dronies. We're not using those for mapping. They could contribute technically, but we don't really use them. For image processing, that's kind of the next step. Structure for motion processing is what we're talking about. So this is taking a set of overlapping images. It's usually a minimum of around 20, but more typically more like 200 to 800, depending on the site. And then go through a series of steps in the software. These aren't manual steps, they're automated. Most packages, you sort of feed the images in, say, I want it for this area, and say go, and it does the processing for you. It's usually pretty straightforward, not a lot of tweaking you have to do. Some software packages have more options for tweaking than others, if you like to do that. But key point extraction is an early one, or early step, and matching And that's basically looking across your overlapping images to find representations of the same pixel point and recognizing that this pixel in this picture is the same as this pixel in that picture and that pixel in this picture and this pixel, and being able to tie and stitch those images together across the surface. The camera optimization is where they take the intrinsics of your camera from your drone, so the actual lens parameters, and kind of add that to the math equation to try to optimize for distortion. Georeferencing is applying the GPS positions from each of your images and any additional control you've set on the ground to be able to take all of these images and put them somewhere in the world. And then we have point cloud generation for the 3D surface to determine where are these, all of these pixels in 3D space. And then densification is taking that point cloud surface, kind of filling in the gaps with the other pixels within the image inputs. So the whole effort is to create this color surface that looks like and matches up with the world, and is usable for different types of data outputs. Down there, you can see there's two paths: cloud processing becoming the most common, drone deploy, maps made easy, site scan, ArcGIS. These are all common packages to do this sort of workflow these days. Advantages are they definitely are the fastest for processing, easier sharing. When you have a result, you can send somebody a link to go, hey, here it is, here's what your map looks like. And it's, you know, going to a remote site, you're not having to transfer a huge file. And then it's scalable. You could, you know, fly 10 sites that day, load them all up, have them processing at the same time. Don't have to wait for your machine to, you know, be freed up from the last process to start the next process. So it's great if you're flying more often or you've got a team, not an individual. PC processing, very common too. A lot of people in our region that operate smaller shops just do PC processing with Pix4 Mapper, WebODM, Agisoft, Bentley. They like it because it's a fixed fee. You kind of buy it, install it on your laptop, and you're done. So you kind of know what it costs. No subscription. Localized control. All the files are just on your local machine. And then a disconnected workflow. It does work on the tailgate of your pickup truck if you want it to. You don't have to, you know, come back, plug a card in, upload it to the cloud, so on and so forth. Some of those advantages of, you know, being cloud connected are nice. You can potentially, with different packages, upload your images directly from the field to the cloud with a 4G connection and have it start processing while you're still in the field. So depending on, you know, what kind of results you're trying to supply for how big a site, for how many people, you might lean, you know, toward one or the other. Any of this stuff I can answer questions about anytime. Deliverables, I'll jump into some examples, but you really want to make sure you have some software that kicks out export formats that people want or your clients need. This is typically mapping orthophotos in like TIFF format, maybe PDF or JPEG. Point clouds, people love point clouds, in LAS format or RCP, which is an Autodesk format for like AutoCAD users. And then different kinds of surfaces, to digital terrain, surface models. Contour files are often pretty popular with planning and design for engineering. So your client, you know, may ask for different things. And it's good to have a package that can spit out sort of a variety of formats in a variety of coordinate systems so that they can use it for whatever they want. Keep it flexible. So looking at some examples, I'm going to jump into an application that we use called Drone Deploy. And this will kind of just show you some dynamic different views of that type of data. One second while we load it up here. This was just a recent comparison that we did.
And that came in just in time as one of our questions just popped in from Mike about what do you find your clients use point clouds for the most?
Point clouds are used, I would say, in a couple of different ways. One is for visualizing a 3D scene. So if you've got a 3D scene, you can use a point cloud, which is, a colorized set of points that gives you a 3D view. And let's take a look at that, what that would look like. So I just switched over this simple map here to a 3D view, and then we can switch it over to a point cloud. And it's going to look like a bunch of points, little dots, all 3D represented, and each one is basically painted with the color of the pixel at that location. So that looks photorealistic. It kind of looks like a picture, but it's actually a point cloud. The points are, elevated above the surface, and you can see the results that were kind of pulled in from the aerial images. You've got a lot more rooftop than you do have sidewalls, because this was a simple map with not a lot of side coverage. But the point clouds give you these representations in 3D space of what is on the site, and how high an object is in relation to everything else. When you take a point cloud and you switch it over to a photorealistic view, it basically fills in the gaps with the rest of your pixels. So it says, okay, this is here, and there's one here, but there's kind of black space in between. So I'm just going to smear it in between and give you a color representation. But the way that looks in viewing is, kind of blurry and messy if you haven't flown a bunch of side coverage photos of those objects. The other way point clouds are used is as an input, like a raw data product, to create other surfaces. So you can use a point cloud to create contours. You could use a point cloud to create a digital elevation model without the photorealistic colors, just to represent like how high things are and how low things are. And what that might look like for a site like this would be here. So this would be more of a generation of a surface with heights, colors representing the heights of objects, how high things are, how low things are. There's nothing with these houses that's too terribly tall, but you can see as we go up here toward the trees, we start to get taller objects standing off the surface. So that might be something you want to create yourself with your own software, and a point cloud would be a wonderful raw data start for that processing. So I hope that answers the question. This piece of software we use, Drone Deploy, we use it for flight planning. Planning on the ground where we're going to fly, manage things like the overlap. I could show you a little bit of what that looks like if you'd like. So you basically have an input kind of polygon, and it's as simple as managing the vertexes on the edge and figure out where you'd like to fly, what shape, what size. Once you have that established for your given site, over on the left-hand side, you start chipping away at the details. The biggest is what we talked about. So flight height is a big one. The higher you fly, the faster it's going to go. But you can see that as I raise the flight height, my flight time goes down. Don't need as many batteries, but also my resolution goes down because I'm farther from the ground. So I'm not getting quite the ground sampling distance. In this case, it's 1 inch, which is still pretty good. And that's based on a flight plan for a specific drone. So you can see right now we're planning for a Mavic 2 Pro down here. And then these are other settings that you can control, like where you want to start, how fast you want to go, what direction you want to fly, because sometimes you need to change whether you're flying kind of on that north-south or east-west. And a lot of that has to be, depends on where you're standing to keep it in line of sight. So you can't have the drone fly a big, long, skinny site and it gets so far away from you that you can't chase and kind of follow it. So you might have it fly the short, across your skinny site. You might have it fly the short direction so that it takes a while to travel from south to north, and you could walk along and kind of follow and keep up. So we often change that flight direction just for our own benefit of being able to fly. And then your overlaps are going to also change how long the flight takes and how many images there will be, so on and so forth. But all these adjustments are things you make to try to get the product you need for the client. On the GIS side, there's also work that we do once these images are completed. And once they are complete, just kind of an example of what that looks like. Once you have a small orthomosaic or a big orthomosaic that's all done, you can go to an export function in a variety of software, not just this one, and then kind of choose your flavor. You know, what do you want coming out of this software for your client? What do they need? Did they say they need an orthophoto? Did they need contours? Did they need a surface model? Going through these export options, you get to pick what export format you're going to use, what coordinate system you're going to use, and oftentimes some sort of control on the resolution if you need to simplify it or have it be the full content. And then you click export, gives you a downloadable file in that format. You can share that with your client. So pretty straightforward.
So we had another question or two pop up.
Mhm.
So one of them was, can the point cloud be merged with thermal data for an alternative output?
Well, the thermal data is something that we can use in mapping, and it produces let's say, a similar result. Let me give you an example. This one will probably work. So this is an example of a site that was mapped, and a thermal sensor was used, also a visual camera, so both. And typically that's how it's done, is you're flying dual cameras. You're taking visual images, you're taking thermal images, and in the end, those are being overlaid together to make it all come together and work. The thermal result, so there's kind of an elevation representation of the trees in this case. The images that make up the thermal map per se of what's going on here. And then there's also the visual mapping images behind this as well that you could use to just, have a visual map of this forested area. This was looking specifically at a pipe issue in the area. The pipe you can actually just catch running through the trees here. It's a large stormwater pipe. What was interesting in that case, though, is it was a lot easier to see in video than it was in the map, because the video moves and catches different angles and allows it to sort of expose itself as you're going through different elements of tree cover. But yes, if you have a thermal drone, you can fly thermal images and process them the same way as the visual images, and create a surface that is a thermal surface that you could use in subsequent software to figure out how hot that thing was, what's the temperature variance across this surface or this object. And that can be very helpful too.
Awesome. We have another question, if
Yep.
you want to take that. Have the low light environments and mapping lights flights prior to sunset created unusable maps?
We've had mapping situations in daylight, even when the day was so dark, flying between showers. The flight speed was a little fast, like the default flight speed from a piece of software, where all of the images were a little blurry on the ground. And you could tell, because if you've done enough of this work, you know what it should look like when you zoom in really close. And in this case, you zoomed in and it was consistently just blurry down in the details. And that's a site where the speed needed to be slowed down in that specific case, because the lighting was just so low, and the drone was moving pretty quick, and it just wasn't able to kind of render a result that we were used to. It's flying around the turn of night. That's a little tricky. We've actually done some mapping in the dark, so we actually do night mapping. It's kind of difficult to do. We use attached lights to the drone, but then we also use lighting on the ground. And you just run different camera settings. You're flying really slow. You've got your kind of camera settings tweaked to limit, to maximize that exposure in low light. And it actually can do a good job. As long as you can get the camera to see the ground well enough, you can stitch and you can pixel match and you can make maps. So it is possible. It's limited to your lighting and your camera. The bigger the camera, the better when the light's low. A bigger lens. I don't mean more megapixels. That's not necessarily important. It's the lens size. Makes a huge difference. best results we've had for night mapping was with a larger full frame camera, around 40 megapixels. But we've done some with a 20 megapixel version as well. In the GIS environment, we take these input ortho photos and we process it. We bring them into different production environments. This example right here is a web environment that services about 700 people within the local government and other associated cities in Pierce County. And they can kind of fire this up. There's a kind of a pro level version, which is ArcGIS based as well, but this is kind of the web version. And they can go and surf different layers and turn on, imagery for coming from drones, which is, plat updates and things like that. And then they can bring in other associated layers that we've constructed from that work. And that might be anything from street center lines to planimetrics. And when I say planimetrics, I mean like building footprints and impervious surfaces. So they do actually use the drone data to draw out these polygons that represent the buildings and the driveways and so on and so forth. This is how we calculate impervious surface fees for stormwater. They use the drone photos to map out new roadway center lines and give those addressing information. And also for some stormwater work to identify where pipes go and where catch basin lids are and so on and so forth. Quality control of that network. But it's definitely something we bring into our GIS environment for clients to provide them spot updates, like responsively, when the aerial photos that are available from larger capture are older. So in this case, the aerial photos would have just been a forested representation instead of, updated with some homes on the site.
So Mike has asked another question, if you want to address that one too. Do you find that GCPs to be necessary if you are not needing centimeter grade accuracy?
Correct, not necessary. Most of our mapping missions don't have ground control. They have native control, which is just the GPS in the drone on each image. So the processing that happens with all of those images, usually hundreds per site, is kind of averaged and applied to correct and control the location of the whole surface, the whole orthophoto output. And that's usually within about, after processing, within 1 to 5 feet of its true position on the earth. And what people prefer, at least in mapping and GIS, is that whatever we've captured aligns with whatever else they use. So we have a quandary all the time in mapping where if we use ground control and we use highly accurate ground control, we will often deliver a map that still doesn't line up with what people are using because it's too good, it's too accurate. And that's just as much of a problem for people as a map that doesn't line up because it's less accurate. They really love that alignment. So most of our orthophoto capture for mapping, we geo-register after we bring it into GIS. We actually move it and adjust it to align it with the existing layers that we use within our production mapping environment so that people kind of have this seamless experience of it's not shifted, it's not moved a little to the left, to the right, or the north, or the south. It just looks like a new version of what we saw before. And that's what most people prefer. We produce metadata on each of our updates so that people can click and see, is this ground control applied? Is that why it's kind of not aligning with what I see? Or is it, been geo-referenced to align with the map? And then we have some levels of correction in the middle also for vertical reasons and other special projects. So most of it's not ground control. Some of it is. Still doesn't always make everybody happy.
Gotcha. So I need to circle back because there was one more comment regarding the explanation that you gave. Thank you for the explanation of the overlay, but it sounded like you cannot convert the 3D point cloud into a thermal rendering to view it in 3D, correct?
The thermal data is 2D by its nature, but the 3D results. So basically you have a raster result. So all these pixels that have a value for temperature. If you wanted in software after the drone process, like GIS software, you could easily take the 3D raster data and associate it with the point cloud data to have that result kind of blended so that you have a 3D thermal result. Yeah, that's not a problem. You can do that. I just couldn't show you in that dynamic kind of live viewer because that's sort of a blend of two different data sets.
Thank you. Awesome. And we still have, looks like I just want to do one more shout out and make sure that everyone knows that if you had any questions, because obviously is a wealth of information here. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll address those.
Yep. If there's any questions about hardware or any step of the process that you have a question about, feel free to ask. This is something I've been doing pretty intensively with drones for a while, for years. And previous to that, also coordinated and led this effort from manned aircraft as well. So I'm pretty familiar with the process.
Awesome. Awesome. And Southern California is the ARC info data is also within 1 to 5 feet. Not sure if that's a question or a statement there, Dennis.
Oh yeah, that I was told by civil engineer in Orange County that they do what Greg's talking about there, and they match it to the terrain. So that is what creates sometimes somebody's property line could be off a few feet. That just saying that I know that for sure about Orange County. Now I'm assuming that San Diego County is doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's pretty common. Site by site, sometimes there's a preference. I recently did drone mapping of a site where there wasn't very good survey control on the general GIS layers for the site. And so when we mapped it with the drone, the data didn't align. And they were doing a design on kind of a stormwater fix that goes off the cliff into the ocean. And they were trying to reconstruct and rebuild this pipe system that was failing and it was eroding the surface. And they really needed more accuracy on both sides. They needed it to align better. And so we went back out and did a reflight with ground control to basically alleviate any errors or make the tolerance of error the lowest possible on that result. And then they hired survey crews to go out and reestablish the boundaries for the properties on the site as well, and sort of mesh those two results together to start over, because everything, from 10 years ago or 15 years ago really didn't mesh up with what we flew that week. It was just way off. And when you don't have things aligning, it's hard to make those decisions, especially if the group working on it can't be on the site, which they weren't. They were a remote consulting group and weren't able to just walk out there and see it really simply.
Awesome. We have several more questions and I'm super excited because I know several people that have jumped onto this chat and through the Coffee Connection are GIS specialists. So I know they're excited about using drones in the industry. So at this rate, I hope I'm not asking so many questions we don't get through the slide deck, but
yep, I can follow them now, Desi, if you want. I see the average size question. So average size of projects, how long do they take? Most of our projects are between probably 30 acres and 50 acres, I'd say on average. A lot of them are development updates. So they're updates for a set of homes that have been built, a new neighborhood, or a new commercial development. And the planning office or the permitting office would love to wants new imagery to be able to help relate to that site as it develops. And so we'll go fly that. They usually take, to capture something that big, takes about a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, and you're done. It could be a little shorter if there's not a lot of detail to capture on the site, like not a lot of development homes and so on. We don't fly any fixed wings. They're a little too tricky to land, especially if it's windy. And they have minimum flight speeds. So, you have to fly your fixed wing at a certain speed or it falls out of the sky. And so when we talked about being able to slow it down for different lighting conditions, fixed wings are very limited in that way. They also have a minimum capture height, so they can't fly below a certain, like a wing truck can only fly down to about 180 feet, or the camera can't keep up with the motion, the speed of the aircraft. And we really need the ability to be able to kind of stop sometimes and take oblique pictures, other fill-in shots. So all rotorcraft in this group. And then how often do we fly sites under development? About every other week. So we have a kind of a running list of sites that are in development, and as they reach certain stages that triggers flights. So it's kind of hit and miss. We might not fly one of those development sites for a week or two or maybe 3, but then we all of a sudden they all come to the right stage of development, and we have to dive on 6 sites in one day. So they sort of come in little spurts. But we do wait for the development on the site to get to a certain stage so that we can see some of the infrastructure in place, a certain amount of infrastructure depending on the client, like waiting for homes to be built, waiting for roads to be paved, things like that. We can do sites that are up to, the biggest we've done is over 1,000 acres. It takes quite a bit more flights, quite a bit more effort, but we very commonly do stuff between 200 and 500 acres along the rivers. We fly higher, we fly faster, and we use a lot of batteries. I see there's asking a question about CPU cores and GPU RAMs on the phone and tablet. I don't think I'll get that specific actually on the hardware because there's a lot to that, but we try to fly a phone or a tablet that is recommended to support the app that we're using. So if you use something like Drone Deploy, Google Drone Deploy supported devices, and you'll find a list of phones and tablets that they recommend to use to make it perform well for that software. It's usually something that's no more than about 3 years old, maybe 4 at the most. If you have an older smartphone or an older tablet, it's not going to do really well in some of the newer apps. And the scenarios about night mapping, we don't usually fly at night. It's not common, but it does happen. And it's typically because there's been a fatal crash that needs to be investigated, and it's getting dark and we can't wait till morning because we have a whole sheriff investigations crime unit, or there's a major crime scene that needs to be documented as fast as possible, and we can't wait until the next morning. That's the most common scenario for mapping at night. And the mapping of a crime scene is also about the modeling of a crime scene. They don't necessarily want to make a pretty map. They need to measure, and they want 3D details for that site. And I think that's the questions, Desi. Am I missing any?
I'm kind of scrolling up to see. It
Yeah.
looked like everything was covered.
I think there's maybe one more just popped in from Annette. Oh, there's a couple more. So custom widget icons. I'm just reading this one here.
From Annette.
Yeah, from Annette. Oh, yeah, Annette, definitely have used those different tools. And for Part 107, a lot of our pilots used Remote Pilot 101, that website training resource, been pretty popular with some of our pilots.
Awesome.
Right.
Looks like Crystal has a question in there as well. Did you see that one?
Yeah, let's see, what's your question though?
Actually, on a side note, Crystal just went and did some training on a specific drone. I'm kind of curious to see how that went. She does GIS as well.
Yeah, it looks like her comment is largely about
No question,
No,
just a comment.
comments about a fixed wing.
Yeah.
And this is something I presented to a regional group recently about, deciding on hardware. And the fixed wing can be a really capable platform. It has some advantages over larger sites. They typically have a longer flight time on average. The takeoff and landing can be tougher unless it's a VTOL, like a wing truck. The EVs, for instance, they kind of have to crash land. You got to have some space to make that work. They The software that they work with is typically proprietary, so you don't have as much flexibility to use a third-party package to control the flight. You have to control the flight with what was included. That can be good and bad, depending on the software package. But the biggest trouble we've had with fixed wings is the takeoff and landing in the wind. They don't really do great with windy conditions, and we often try to fly in, I won't say all weather, but we fly in less than great weather sometimes, fairly gusty around this region, and some wind tolerance is great. Fixed wings can do well in flight when it's windy, but they don't do great on landings when it's windy, especially the VTOLs. They can get blown around a lot because they just have a lot of surface area. And that minimum flight height and that minimum, that flight speed kind of scope is very challenging. And if you look into the details, the marketing for fixed wings, when they say our fixed wing can fly 300 acres, and this, rotor drone, the Phantom 4, can only fly 20 acres on a battery. It's always relative to a ground sampling distance, which is relative to a camera resolution, and it's not an even apples to apples comparison. So if you actually compare like a Wingtra with its spec camera and what it covers to a like platform with a similar sensor, like a Matrice 300 with a P1, the area they cover is very similar. It's really not that different.
Awesome. All right, we got a couple of thumbs up in there. Just really quick reminder while we're going on with the slide deck that we have here from Greg. But if you have any last minute questions, because we are coming up at the top of the hour, this is definitely the time to ask. So thank you, Greg. Not sure if the slide deck, if you had also some information, maybe if somebody wanted to reach out to you, we would love for you to share that information. I was wondering about the size of the SD cards. Obviously, it's going to be based on the size of the project you're doing, but do you have a preference of what you would be using standard when you go out to do a mission?
Most of our pilots are of the mind of having lots of small cards instead of fewer large cards. So they use actually pretty small, like 24 gigabyte cards most commonly. We don't fly a lot of video. Some of our pilots are video specialists, but even they like to break their work into different cards. And then we usually use a series of Post-it notes or sticking cards in our notebook to organize the data as we're capturing it on a really busy day, so that we know that this card is over and done with, and it represents this work on this site, and then we switch cards and move on from there. We've had some occasions when we use a card all day and get too many eggs in one basket, and we lose it because of a card issue. So once the work goes beyond probably 1 or 2 sites in a day, there's usually a card swap and a new card. And all we do is slice the foam in our cases, like make little slits, and we just load it up with cards. So every drone case just has sort of a little library of available cards to use, and that works really well for us.
Awesome. Awesome. Izzy had a question regarding mapping with the Mavic 3 Enterprise. What is your favorite acquisition app to use?
Our favorite is Drone Deploy. We use Pix4 Capture. We use DroneLink. We also use Drone Deploy, and we use Pilot 1 and Pilot 2. So we definitely get a good mix of stuff in, and then we've used some older products as well in the past. But those are all products we use today. But Drone Deploy is the standard for our group. It's the most user-friendly plus tunable for an individual site. It has offline support, which is very important. It'll work in an area where we have no data service. You can basically load up your map offline and travel out to a remote site and still operate it. And it has the best workflow when it comes to switching batteries. So if you do a big site, drone flies, runs out of power, comes back, lands, you swap the battery, hit go, and it has a really good, pick up where it left off sort of workflow. And then it does some nice organization of your data afterwards for you, and allows uploads from your mobile device. So there's some kind of workflow optimizations within Drone Deploy that we like for scale. But if you're a small shop, like a single operator or just a couple of technical people, you can make a lot of things work. Drone Deploy works best for us because we have quite a lot of pilots. A lot of them are busy, and they really want that scalability where they can throw multiple jobs at the processing at the same time, and even decide to do things like, I flew that in a certain way, but I'm interested in processing it 3 different ways because I'd like to see what the results are. That's really hard to do if you don't have that scale. And then shareability. Yeah. DroneLink would be the next step. They like DroneLink quite a bit.
Awesome, awesome. So, along the lines of the 15 pilots that you had mentioned and the pilots that are actually out there working in your environment, that's a perfect segue over to a conversation that we have had as far as how do we get people more involved, females, women more involved in GIS, but also just if somebody's just starting out, how would they pursue this career path? What's a good way to get involved?
If you want to get into at least this workflow mapping, one of the easiest ways to do it is get a drone that supports a basic mapping flight and processing app. And one of the favorites around here, especially if you want something not PC based, is Maps Made Easy. So that's a site where it has a flight app, supports a bunch of different drones, just consumer models. You don't have to buy anything super fancy, and allows you to do the auto flight, and it does the processing, and you just pay per map. So it's kind of like a prepaid phone. You pay as you use it, and you can kind of try it out, try this, fly that site, try that, not pay a lot of money, get some nice samples done for less than, $40 in a month, and see how it goes. And from there, you can kind of decide what work you might be doing and whether there might be a package that works better for you. But that's a very popular one if you want to try it out. Drone Deploy had free accounts in the past. I think they might still have a limited free account where you can do up to 100 images of input. So that'd be another thing to look into also if you want to get started with mapping. But you can start mapping with something as simple as like a Mini 2, a DJI Mini 2. We actually map with Mini 2 ourselves for operations over people reasons because it's tiny. But that's the smallest thing that we fly.
Awesome. Awesome. So Rebecca has put in there that Drone Deploy has a 14-day free trial and the flight planning software is free. Awesome.
Yep.
So thank you.
Yep, and there's a little plug in there on SiteScan, integrating with Esri. SiteScan is a good tool. We have some regional clients that use it. It doesn't support a lot of different drones, so you got to make sure if you choose like a software product that you want to use, make sure you look at their list of what they support because you got to have that. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. So it's that compatibility loop of hardware with the flight automation, with the image processing. You've got to have compatibility across that. I maintain a whole matrix of hardware and software for our region so that people can look that stuff up kind of readily. But that's an important thing to not make a mistake on, because a lot of people buy this or buy that and then find out it doesn't work with this or that, get a little bit in a corner, have to spend extra money or return something.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, is there a way that they could reach out and ask any further questions? Maybe we could all head to Washington and come fly, right? Such great information.
I can supply the slides to Desi if you share slide decks with the group, and it's got my contact information at the bottom.
Perfect. Perfect. Actually, if you want to go through it, finish going through it, I know we had a lot of questions pop up, but we can also do a screenshot of it, right? For those.
Yeah, basically right there at the bottom if you want to shoot me an email. Greg Lang at greg.lang@piercecountywa.gov. And I do kind of head up the technical side of a regional group that's affiliated with the Washington GIS Association called WAGIS. And we're kind of a regional mapping drone group called Special Interest Group. And we've got about 70 members, mostly Western Washington, but some Oregon, some Eastern Washington. It's largely governmental folks and largely mapping focused. But we talk about drones in all types of uses as well. So it does stray from mapping constantly, but mapping is always the focus of that group too. If you Google that or look that up, you can sign up for that group, or you could ask to sign up for that group if you're interested through me, and I'll pass it on to Peter, my other lead, and he can send you the invite information. So just let us know.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, I know you're following along with the chat right there, and look at that. Everybody is just so happy and a wealth of knowledge. Yes, you are the best, Greg. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Love the information. We really appreciate that you did take your time to share with us. You are a wealth of information, and it was great that we were able to sit here for an hour and have you share with us. And so we really do appreciate it. All right. With that, we are going to cut out just a few minutes early and wrap it up. Quick reminder, don't forget to go put in your little nomination for your women to watch as well. And thank you so much, Greg. We really appreciate your time. And I want to thank everybody that's joined us here on the Coffee Connection. And we look forward to next week. We have a live demo next week with Paladin, and we have Drone Deploy coming up. We have so many other amazing people coming in to speak. We're super excited. So Greg, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
Good to be here.
All righty. Okay, everybody, we will see you next week.
Bye.
All right, bye. That kind of wraps it up.